Well, Dr. Laura, welcome to the podcast. How are you doing this fine day?
Great, thank you for having me.
It's good to have you on. So, I'm going to ask you my favorite question to ask all my podcast guests. What's the best piece of advice you ever received?
That I've received or I have found in my work. My advice or advice that what I after talking to 60 people is things will work out. Don't worry.
I love that. Kind of like the old Bobby McFerrin song, Don't Worry, It'll Work Out. Actually, don't worry, be happy, I guess. That's cool. I looked at your bio and you have an extensive and very impressive history. I'm curious, along your journey, who are some people that served to inspire you or maybe mentor you along the way?
There was someone that inspired me to do what I did. It just everything kind of fell into what. For example, I knew I wanted to be a physician. I was a girl. I grew up in the Middle East, and women often didn't do that. And
Sure.
then medicine, I pursued research because of all the physicians, the ones most respected were the ones who did research. So it just all kind of like depending on the environment, I decided to pursue that whatever it was. And then I wrote the book after I did the research about wisdom, and I found these 8 elements, and I'm like, wow, this can really improve people's lives. So I wrote the book Common Wisdom afterward.
Well, you actually stole my next question. What inspired your own comment? But I looked at your book, and there are some really interesting parts to it. And I'm going to kind of read the 8 elements. I'm going to ask you kind of maybe pick some of those that really resonated more with you than others. You talk about kindness, emotional regulation, empathy, self-reflection, open-mindedness, decisiveness, perspective, and altruism. Is there one of those 8 that you think is maybe? I know they're all important. Is there one that you would say this is really one of the most important of those wisdoms to kind of master?
Well, I think you mentioned the sub themes. The elements that I found were resilience, kindness, positivity, spirituality, humility, tolerance, creativity, and curiosity. And of those 8, I feel like they're all connected, but
Right.
the ones I really connect with more are positivity, humility, and curiosity. And the
Mm,
reason is because positivity is it helps you be resilient. It helps you kind of live a better life, have a good life, and we all deserve to be happy. And humility is a great way to connect with others. They don't need to know any of the degrees or whatever you've accomplished. That's not going to change your interaction with others. So it shouldn't make you feel big to make others feel small. But it does have a major problem. And curiosity is the foundation for a lot of it, of all of the day, because it's a way to wonder about what's out there, what's going on, or what it is, not taking things at face value.
right. I just had my podcast that I released today actually is about a guy who talks about curiosity and leadership and how if you want to be a good leader, you have to always remember to be curious because it makes you a better leader. So it's funny that you talk about that because the release of my podcast today was on curiosity.
Well, I feel like the 8 elements I discovered resilience, kindness, positivity, spirituality, humility, tolerance, creativity, and curiosity are all great traits of a phenomenal leader.
Right. I'd love for you to define for me humility. That's a term that we don't wrap our minds around easily. I know in my sphere as a pastor, we talk about humility. Humility comes from us looking at it as we compare ourselves to God. We have undergone posture that is humility. I'm curious how you define humility in your book.
I think it's in the idea so C.S. Lewis said something about humility that has made me think that it's not about who like your place in the world is not as important as it is about your essentially the world itself. So similar to you, the way you're perceiving a person's place compared to God, but it's the idea that It's more important to understand the people around you. And I don't know if I define it, but I have a quote from C.S. Lewis in my book that I
Okay.
say
Sure, it'd be
before.
great.
Yeah, let me find it. Um, and it's such a great. Here it is. Hold on. Okay, it's humility is not thinking less of yourself, but thinking of yourself less.
I love that.
And the idea is you are confident, you are grounded. Well, you are a substantial person, and you don't need people to hear that or know that because you're secure in who you are. And that's the idea of humility. You don't need to tell others about it just because you are who you are.
I love that. So tell us about the research you did to write this book, because I'm curious. I just got done my doctoral dissertation, so I spent a lot of time last little bit doing the research. I'm curious, when you think about the research you did, what surprised you in the research for this book?
Well, the reason I did it was because my body started to get all these symptoms, and I essentially fell apart. And the people I was really interested in their opinion medicine kind of was ready to label me, and so they didn't think outside the box. The wise did, and so I pursued wisdom. And what surprised me the most was the second element of kindness, and that was because I'm Middle Eastern, and kindness is viewed as weakness where I come from. It's
Sure.
it's not respected. So and it's something I grew up with. So it was never something I thought about. But yet, of the 60 people I interviewed, kindness was so important to them. It was not only how they treated others, what they did for mankind, but also how they treated themselves.
I love that. And I think we live in an age right now. I think the last year or so, kindness has also kind of been something that's kind of gone out the window in our daily interaction with people. And it so much impacts our inner being and spirit if we're always dealing with so much negativity in our life.
Well, I always tell people that people will always remember how you feel, but not what you did. And I know Maya Angelou talked about that a lot. And if you're kind, they're gonna remember that. They'll remember that way more than they'll remember you. The people we see out there that are nasty to each other.
Definitely. So I look at your book, and how do you combine the fields of psychology, neuroscience, and sociology into explaining the meaning of life in the work that you've done?
So to do any research project or anything, you have to see what's out there to begin with. So I actually use psychology, sociology, and geriatric journals to kind of arrive at the people I spoke with. That's when I realized that wisdom has an inversely relationship with age, and that's why I only spoke with people who are 50s, 60s, and 70s. That's where I also found that wisdom is not related to gender, race, or ethnicity. It is related to region. And that's why I only spoke with people who were in North America, the US and Canada. And it's funny because someone mentioned, how did you find these 60? I'm like, first of all, I had nothing to do with picking them. That would mean I am the wisest, and that's not how you do research.
Right.
You have nothing to do with who your subjects are. And so I just advertise that we're looking for wise individuals. And one person knew another, and they just grew.
I love that. You talk about your sample size and how diverse it was. What surprised you about the people you interviewed as you kind of dug deeper into this? I know I did my research, and always some aha moments that came out of the research. Did something surprise you from all these interactions?
What surprised me was how much difficulty they had gone through.
Mm,
And resilience was our first theme, meaning was most common. And people had gone through so much difficulty, so much. One woman lost two husbands, and she was like, "All you can do is laugh. What can I do?" And yet, despite that, they were at such peace. They were not bitter, they were not angry. They were just at such peace.
Wow. So, besides kindness, what element do you think of wisdom is most overlooked in our society today?
Well, humility. I the problem is we have the internet, we have social media, and it's all about how you can show off to others, how you can be your Facebook page, how you wish you lived your Facebook life, and I'm like people are all about what others think, and that's not what humility is about either. So it's I feel like that's definitely something that has taken a back seat.
So, let's dig a little deeper because I'm curious. As you look at these case studies, can you share a case study that illustrates each of the eight elements of wisdom? Because I'm just kind of, that I think help us to kind of unpack some of the discoveries you made.
Well, each one it's funny. I don't know if I sprinkled it into my book, but the first I would definitely say Sissy being resilient with the two husbands she's lost was
Right.
thing that her perspective. Kindness, one guy I won't forget, kindness was so important to him towards living being that after he saw his sister pass away, he became a vegetarian and he does not touch any animals. And he also started to volunteer in a hospice because her last months were in a hospice as well. And so kindness was such an important part to him. Positivity, it's funny, I had the one man. So we assigned these to everyone. Most had 2 to 5 of the elements. Only one person had all eight. Of the 60, only one person had all eight. And his name was Larry. And when I spoke to him about I had a set of 10 questions everyone looked at or answered for me, open-ended questions. And when I asked Larry about how do you deal with difficulties in life, and Larry is the one that had all eight. And he goes, "Well, I never call anything a difficulty." I would reframe it right away. And I'm like, interesting. So he's like, I never, and then he said something like, I would never be in the weeds. I would go to the mountaintops. And that was his philosophy is even from the get go, that's not how you perceive it. Spirituality, I don't know if there was, I definitely felt like most felt like there was something bigger than themselves. They didn't know what that was, but they definitely did. I don't know if there was an instance. I mean, there was one person who talked about how she every morning has breakfast with God. And in that breakfast, it's not, prayer is important to her, and it's not the idea that she communicates with God. It's her kind of hopes and wishes that she puts out there. And so prayer was a big one in spirituality. Humility, it's funny because I interviewed many, and humility was my fifth element. But it was fascinating. I spoke to one guy who sold 100 million copies. He's a record producer,
Wow.
and he sold 100 million copies of records before the age of the internet. And news he had a national news network went to his home. He had awards about doing Saturday Night Fever and the Bee Gees and Barbara Streisand all like in a corner. He could care less about that. And I was just fascinated. And that was humility. So, and then after humility was tolerance. And I think the idea of tolerance is, again, being open minded. As a scientist, it's very important to me that you are unbiased and open minded and non judgmental in whatever you pursue. And that was really, something I found. And the next two, the last two, creativity and curiosity. Those are elements that people don't realize that we all have in us. Think about who you were as a kid. You were creative. You took the most random thing, a sheet, and you turned it into a fort. And you were curious. You asked why all the time. And we tend to forget that about ourselves, or we take it out of ourselves, or we let life get in the way. I get it. We have responsibilities. It doesn't mean that you still can't be curious and creative.
Sure. You talked a little bit about how your background made some of those elements harder for you to have, like kindness. I'm curious, did you study how cultural differences and perceptions impact those wisdoms in different societies?
I did not, but the only thing I found, as I mentioned, is how wisdom is defined differently in different regions. For example, wisdom in Asia is different than wisdom in the Middle East, and that's why I stuck to only North America.
Right.
Um, 'Cause it seems as if people may bring their teachings with them if they move somewhere. So a culture can be influential, but at the end of the day, they end up acting, assimilating whatever is the region they're in.
Makes sense. Since you did study North America, what trends have you noticed here in America that move us either closer to the eight wisdoms or and those that move us farther away from the eight wisdoms?
There's any, I mean, how I defined it were the eight based on North America. I don't think anyone else has done a look into what they are anywhere else and how they differ. My work was probably the first that looked at even wisdom, and the reality is, and this is why I believe that things happen for you and not to you. I mean, think about it. We had COVID a few years ago, and the
Right.
only reason I was able to do this was because my interviewees were very comfortable with Zoom, or just comfortable with having internet interviews. They would not have been like this had it been 5 years before. So that's why I believe that things just happen in your favor, and people don't realize that. Favor is not necessarily a good thing in every situation. I'm sure, I had one woman in my interviewees who lost a child and a grandchild,
Wow.
and she was divorced, and I think ex-husband tried to kill her a few times. She had really gone through a lot, and it was not that those things are happy events in any way or beneficial, but she learned a lot from that.
Yeah, that's amazing. As you think about where we are today in our society, do you see that people are more open to embracing those wisdoms, or are they more? You're doing something that's kind of on the cutting edge. How do you get people to understand that these eight common wisdoms are something that is kind of beneficial for their spirit and for their whole being?
Wisdom is not really relevant. I think because life's difficult. We're all trying to get by. And so the last thing people think about is, let me improve my ex. But
Right.
think if what I have found is that, okay, so these do define wisdom, but in reality, they're the keys to be living a very successful life, mastering life. So again, I apologize if I slur my speech just because of my health problems. And so I just feel like the eight are, you can think of them in a way to, it's eight elements to master life. And you read about them, yes, they happen to be the definitions of wisdom. But I think if you embrace those eight, you will live a more meaningful life.
Makes sense. So you said that your research is probably on the cutting edge of this. I always thought so if someone were to try to pick up where you started, what do you see as the next step in this research?
No, it's funny because someone in the research world, whenever you publish papers, the last paragraph is the author's kind of future vision. What is the next step? And I have written plenty of that, and everything has a next step. But I don't think understanding this topic has a next step. I think it's really just helping people develop these. So, I mean, I did such extensive work, and it was so hard to find them. So hard. When people talk about divine intervention, I'm like, that was divine intervention. Finding those 60 all over the US and Canada, just finding them was divine intervention. Like how they had to go through so many loops to set up a call with me to have it be interviewed. And I had a research assistant set that up. It was just unbelievable. And that I just don't see it having another step to it.
I wonder, as you talked about that, though, I was thinking maybe the next step is how do you help people to foster these eight wisdoms? How you help them develop them? Is there a process to teach this or enhance it? If you already, kind of, is it more of a taking these eight things and how do you put those into practice in your life?
Well, at the end of each chapter, I have things to ask yourself. And those people just love them because it made them more self reflect and think.
Sure.
And so I recently, I want to say early December, came out with a journal that has more of those things to ask yourself based on those eight elements. And that's also on Amazon. So there is a Common Wisdom journal that's out as well. And that's more of this because people love it. I think the original is the book. I think you don't have to have the book to do the journal. You can do the journal first and think to yourself, I'll get the book after.
Right.
I think it helps you think about yourself more.
I love that. So, what do you hope when people pick up this book, they get out of it?
First of all, it's an easy read. The book is such an easy read. I was tired of writing such boring manuscripts that I made sure that this was simple but powerful. That I got my points across without it being complicated. And secondly, I'm very to the point. As a scientist, you have to be. What you would write in a paragraph, you have to write it in like a sentence. So the book would only take someone a few days, if that. I really feel, and in the reviews, if someone reads my Amazon reviews, they'll see that the book changes the way they think, has changed lives. Someone said it saved their marriage. I just think it will impact people positively,
I love
and
that.
and that's what it has done so far.
I love to ask my guests this question. As you think about the impact you're making with this book and maybe future projects, what do you want your legacy to be?
I want my legacy. It's funny because I often say I wish I took my own advice. And my thoughts are to live in faith and not in fear. And I'm sure I lived in fear my whole life. I had to become a doctor. I once had to be a doctor. I had to get this, that, this, that. So I'm sure I was always living in fear. But I think if you tell someone live in faith, have some faith, you will not. It will be okay. I think that's the biggest lesson, and that's what I want people to realize.
That's great. What are you working on next? What's your next major project?
Oh, I'm not working. I mean, just murder. So no, there's no additional part. I just feel like there's so much like wisdom in this book, calm wisdom. There's so much peace in there. It can change your life. There's so much in there that my current goal is to get the word out about it.
That's great. Is there anything I haven't asked you that I should have asked you?
No, I think that's it.
Well, as we wrap this up, first of all, where can people find and buy the book Common Wisdom and connect with you on social media?
So the original website I used when I found my 60 was the wisdomresearchproject.com. That links to my website, which is lauragabayan.com. And that's the one, but people may not remember that, lauragabayan.com. And the book and the journal are both sold on Amazon. And I think it just changes lives. It's a great holiday gift. It's just, I don't I just there's not enough words of how much value it has. It's priceless and timeless. And what these people had to say was really important.
That's great. As you wrap up this amazing conversation, what are the key takeaways you want the audience to walk away from our discussion with?
Know that things work out and live in faith and not in fear. And whatever happens, life is difficult, but it's happening for you and not to you.
Well, Dr. Laura, thanks for taking the time out in this busy season to share with us the work that you did, the research you've done, and the words of wisdom that you have for all of us to kind of start the new year out. So thank you for what you did and the research you did.
Thank you.